That brings us to the Ladell Betts news, which, of course, that's one of those deals where, to me, it's difficult to get a full evaluation of how much was it recruiting, how much was it development by that particular coach, or just the players developing themselves and taking it upon themselves in terms of really gauging the performance of a position coach to say that success or failure was because of that position coach. But obviously, Iowa's had a pretty impressive run under Ladell Betts, who did 4 seasons. Of course, he's an all-time great, and of course now moves on to the New York Giants.
Yeah, I think development, recruiting, it's, some of that's, I guess, subjective, but I look at the people that he brought in, and we've been really excited about some of these running backs, Mark, from Caleb Johnson with his size when they flipped him from Cal to Jazz Patterson. I remember talking about Jazz, and I didn't know what. So you don't know what some of these guys are going to do physically, what kind of weight they're going to be able to put on. A guy like Akram Wadley was electric at Iowa, but he wasn't able to put on weight. Tyler Goodson got a little bit bigger, but I think struggled getting real big, although he's found a role in the NFL with the Colts. But I remember comparing Jazz Patterson to a young Sean Green. Now, he never has filled into that frame, so to speak, and I don't know that he will. I just don't know that he's going to be that type of a runner. But boy, he hits hard. We're going to see what he can do this year, assuming he sticks around. So I think it's a combination of both. He's had young guys ready. Kamari Moulton played as a true freshman. Caleb Johnson, Jazz Patterson, they were playing as true freshmen. Tyler Goodson was playing early. So I just think we've seen it's hard to really look at anything that he did or didn't do and be real critical of it. He was real productive in the state of Florida. He found diamonds in the rough in guys like TJ Washington and Kamari Moulton, able to land solid 4-star, 3/4-star prospects in Patterson, Johnson. They had the kid that ended up flipping to North Carolina State. That was, I guess you could say, a miss on his part because they had him committed and he flipped. That's going to happen in recruiting. I really like Brevin Dahl. Yeah, he's an in-state kid. Haven't seen anything from him yet, but he could have went to Iowa State or elsewhere. He picked Iowa. We don't know yet about Nate McNeil, but it's a blow. I mean, if I was to pick anybody on the offensive side of the football to lose as it relates to a non-head coach, non-offensive coordinator, I think I'd have to pick everybody but him. I mean, I don't know that Abdul Hodge is indispensable. I just, he's a converted linebacker that came to a program, or I should say a former linebacker who's coaching tight ends. And I'm not saying he's done a bad job, but I think he's learned on the job. And I'm sure he learned a little from Brian because Brian coached tight ends. And, it's a position now that's sort of, at least last year, they took a step back as far as volume, whether that's just a result of personnel or I think it's more so a result of the slight stylistic change with this new offense and the new coordinator. So, man, I would rather lose Abdul. I would have rather lose George Barnett. Some people may think I'm crazy on that. I've seen one impressive season from the offensive line, and that was this year. And I still don't think they were good in pass pro. So, it sounds like there was interest for George Barnett from other franchises / programs, and he stuck around. I know other people were interested in a couple guys on the defensive side, and of course LeVar Woods and Phil Parker. But who else am I missing on the offensive side? John Budmeyer. You know how I feel about that. I mean, hey, the wide receiver room did okay last year. I give him some credit for that. I tend to give Tim Lester more credit because of his track record. And again, John Budmeyer is a guy who didn't play the position as coaching. Ladell Betts was a terrific player and did a lot of good things from the development side, from the recruiting side. His players loved him. I remember talking with a couple of the guys, and he's had guys leave, like LaShawn Williams left. I don't remember if Tyrone Tracy, Ladell would have been there with Tyrone Tracy, but of course Tracy was playing receiver, and I don't know how much of a chance he ever had at playing running back if he just didn't want to play running back at Iowa. Of course, he eventually converted over to running back at Purdue. So guys have left, but everybody talks about how much of a family atmosphere he creates. You and I have talked about how he's been able to hang on to his top 3 to 4 guys over the last couple of seasons, which is surprising because they've all been guys that look to be Big Ten level starters. Up until this past year, we hadn't seen anybody emerge as an all-conference back, but we saw that this past year. And to this point, through the first transfer portal window of the offseason, nobody's left besides LeSean Williams, who had already decided that he'd be leaving. So, as we talked about last week, Jazz Patterson's back, Kamari Moulton's back, Brevin Dahl, Nate McNeil comes in, Xavier Williams is back. Does everybody stick around? They're going to have a chance to compete in the spring, and then they'll have another portal window. I'd just be throwing darts in the dark if I was to tell you yes or no on that, because I don't know who they're going to hire. My guess is Kirk has an idea. Who knows how long this has been in the works? But Kirk had to know that Ladell was, he's done a good. I think we weren't surprised that the Giants. Were you surprised when you saw that the Giants would be interested in hiring him based on what he's done at Iowa? I mean, he's a former NFL guy. He was a successful player at that level, has been really good at Iowa. No scandals, nothing like that. So yeah, I mean, he's a solid hire for a franchise that needs help at running back. And it's interesting, who he's being paired with. Did you see that? He's actually being reunited with Steve Ferentz, who's coaching defensive line, assistant defensive line, and then James Ferentz is an assistant offensive line coach for the Giants. And Tyrone Tracy, who, ironically enough, again, the word on the street is that he didn't want to play running back. Who knows if that's true? He's playing running back for the Giants, former Hawkeye receiver. So some irony and all that. But anyways, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see who they go after. The first thing I said yesterday on my on the video I published on my channel was in the past we've all been guilty of this. When somebody leaves Iowa, we automatically think former player. Who can we get? Former player. Chuck Long. Chuck Long's going to coach the offense. Let's see. Marvin McNutt's going to coach receivers. Let's just calm down a little bit. I don't know that's where they should go. And of course, I knew before I even saw any of it. As soon as I published a video, people, they do it with your videos too. They comment on the video before they even watch it. They commented on it before they even watch it. Albert Young, hire Albert Young. What has Albert Young done? Listen, Albert Young was a terrific back in 2005. I believe he led the Big Ten in rushing in 2005. But he has not proven it anywhere close to this level. I think he's coaching somewhere, D2? I'd have to go look at where he's at currently. I know he's a big Hawkeye. He's through and through Hawkeye. One thing I mentioned yesterday, and I think it's fair to bring this up, all right, at this stage in Kirk Ferentz's career. This is not a vindictive comment on my part, but I do wonder, because I'm sure you could bring up anecdotal examples of guys that Kirk Ferentz has either brought into the program to advise or to speak or to be a captain. I have to go back and trace that since 2020, but you know where I'm going with this. Guys that spoke up, whether you want to say against the program or along side by side with their brothers in arms in 2020 regarding the allegations of racial disparities. I just wonder, what is Kirk Ferentz's relationship with those guys? And I'm not saying he's not amiable with those guys. And the reason I bring it up is because Albert Young did speak out in support of his teammates. I'm not saying he was ripping Iowa. And I for the record, yesterday people were throwing out that name. I thought, I'm going to go back and see if I can find what Albert Young said. And I went back, and I'll admit that I went back and tried to find that post on his social media. Could not find it, but there are articles written that basically cite Albert Young as talking about how the culture at Iowa prevented some former black players from returning to Iowa and feeling welcome at Iowa. I'm not saying he said that about himself, but about other people. And I just wondered, the fact that he even said that, and then you had the lawsuit that eventually ended up in a settlement. I know you're wincing a little bit, but I wonder. You just wonder. These are human beings, and Kirk's a human being. And he may prove me wrong. Maybe he goes out and hires Albert Young, and if he doesn't hire Albert Young, it may not have anything to do with that. But I do think to go out and hire someone that maybe was on the other side of that issue might take a little humble pie.
This is why I'm wincing, and I may be completely off base here. So let's say I own an organization. Well, maybe I do. But anyway, or own an organization where people are bought in of all different ethnicities, two genders, etc. Maybe a certain group of people don't feel there's a difference between being disrespected, mistreated, and maybe a difference between that, which is wrong, and maybe being a bit unaware or blind to creating an environment that they feel culturally comfortable. You know what I mean?
Oh, I know. This we could go revert right back to the conversations we had about the 2020 scandal. I'm just saying, how did Kirk perceive every one of those athletes, former athletes specifically, not the guys that were still with his program, because those guys were with the program. He wasn't going to cut those guys because they made statements. Because like guys like Kayvon Merriweather and wasn't Gavin Williams, a couple of those guys back in 2020, they spoke up. I don't know that they spoke up against the program, but they wanted to be cogs for change. And I think Kirk was supportive of that. At least that's what he said publicly. But I just wonder all the guys that spoke out specifically on social media. I'm talking Carl Davis, Jaleel Johnson, Jordan Lomax was really well respected with the program. He spoke up. I mean, there were a lot. I mean, a laundry list of guys that spoke up. DJK. I don't know that Marvin. I mean, there were some guys that came to Kirk's defense, but I'm just saying. I remember Albert Young is one of those guys that I'm like, oh, he made a comment because he's one of the. I'd say he's one of the greats under Kirk Ferentz. He never made it in the NFL. He had a cup of coffee, but never really stuck. And I know like I say, he's a very big Hawkeye fan. He's a proud Hawkeye, but it's not a matter of do I think. Sorry, there's a box elder bug that somehow got into my studio. It's not a matter of do I think Albert Young would be interested in the job. It's a matter of this late in Kirk Ferentz's career, does he bring in someone that perhaps he feels was in any way disloyal to him? I'm not saying he would or he wouldn't. I don't know. So I'm not trying to make out like I know Kirk Ferentz is a vindictive person. That's not what I'm saying. But we're all humans. And is it possible that there are some unsettled feelings there? I don't know because I've not heard Kirk speak on individuals like Albert Young since then. I'm sure he would compliment Albert Young for the person that he is and that for the athlete that he was. Maybe he'd even bring him back to be an honorary captain. But would he hire him to be his running backs coach? Is that a fair question, Mark? Am I out of line for bringing that up?
No, you're not out of line. There's a lot of conjecture there, but it's reasonable conjecture.
Yeah. So I don't, but all in all, I think it's unlikely. People, that's my whole point in bringing this up is I think fans like to jump onto former players. Like Sean Green would never be a candidate because he just doesn't, I don't even know what he's doing. He's not coaching anywhere. Albert Young's coached. Hey, I brought up DJK. He's coached running backs and receivers for I don't know how many years now. And I kind of laughed at that because DJK Kirk's never even brought him back. I don't know that there would ever even be. My understanding, those guys haven't talked in over a decade, well over a decade. So
I don't remember him.
Darrell Johnson Koulianos.
Oh, okay. I was
Sorry.
picturing DJ KAY, and I was thinking, who's that?
No. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
He's coached running backs, even though he's a former wide receiver. So
Yeah.
I would guess it's going to be someone else. Kirk's got lots of NFL connections, as does Tim Lester. And frankly, I'd like Lester, even though he's not a former running back. He knows people, and he's a younger guy. Maybe I hope Kirk gives him an opportunity, unlike he did with Bud Meyer, to select who he thinks would work best with the group and with the offense. And by the way, Michael in the chat says, how about Tavian Banks? I think that's very unlikely. I know Tavian. I think that's very unlikely. Do I think Tavian would be a good candidate? Yeah, I do. Don't expect that to happen.
Because of the issues you just raised?
No. Nothing.
Okay.
Nothing regarding 2020. But I can tell you there has been interest from Tavian's side in the past, and I just don't think that's going to happen. So he would be, I mean, he's a great dude, lives in Iowa, but he's not coaching. I don't think so. Remember, he's part of the Fry era. You know, let's not act like the Banks boys were brothers or something. Brad was in his own era and Tavian was on his own. So yeah, how many former Hayden Fry coaches has Kirk brought on? Let me ask you that question, Mark. How many?
How would I know that?
Well, just
I'd have
think
to think about it.
how many former Hayden Fry players or coaches has Kirk brought on?
I'd have to run through Iowa's coaching staff.
Well,
And
Chuck Long coached quarterbacks in 1999.
Okay.
For 1 year.
First year. Okay.
And with I believe it was with Kenny O'Keefe, and then he was gone. And I'm not saying has anything to do with. I'm not saying he left because of certain issues, but I think that was mutual when it happened. But I'm not recalling any specific former players under the Fry era or coaches that have been hired on by Kirk Ferentz. And I don't know how many have been interested, but I'm just saying in general that has not happened. I'd be shocked if a guy like Tavian Banks was brought back. Yeah, Erica brings up LeVar, but I'm not talking about guys who crossed over. Because didn't Ladell also cross over? Wasn't Ladell, I think he was probably recruited. I'd have to go back to, when did he come in? What was his first year at Iowa? I've talked to Coach Patterson about this before, but his first year at Iowa would have been 98. So, yeah, there was crossover there as well. I'm not talking about guys who were crossovers, right, that carried over from the Fry era, like LeVar and Ladell. I'm talking guys who are exclusively in that era. Now, they've recruited the kids and relatives of former Hayden Fry players and coaches, but not the other that I can remember.